Think about the one place you've always been told to be cautious of: water. Drowning, storms, shipwrecks. It's a place of danger, right? Now, what if I told you that there was a time when water was the only safe haven? A time when land was the true death trap, where the very ground beneath people's feet promised nothing but suffering and destruction. Unbelievable? Keep watching, because what you're about to hear will challenge everything you know about survival. Throughout history, people have sought shelter in forests, mountains, and even underground to escape war, disease, and famine. But there have been extraordinary moments when water, yes, the same unpredictable, ever-moving force, was the only sanctuary left. During these times, the land was a living nightmare, filled with death, violence, and sickness, forcing entire communities to abandon it and take refuge on lakes, rivers, and the open sea. What could be so terrifying that people would rather risk the unknown waters than stay on solid ground? The answer lies in a series of harrowing historical events in which stepping onto land meant near certain doom. Let's explore these shocking stories that prove that sometimes the safest place isn't where you think. The plague that sent people fleeing to water. One of the most devastating events in human history was the Black Death of the 14th century. This plague wiped out nearly 200 million people across Europe, Asia, and Africa. It was so contagious that entire villages turned into ghost towns overnight. Cities reeked of death, and people began to realize that no one was safe on land. The disease thrived in crowded, unsanitary conditions, spreading through fleas, rats, and even the air. Desperate to escape the invisible killer, many people took to the water. In Venice, authorities created quarantine stations on small islands, isolating ships before they could reach the mainland. Others built floating homes, believing that the fresh air of the sea would keep them safe. And for some, it worked. Mariners and those living on waterborne structures had significantly lower infection rates compared to their land-dwelling counterparts. War-torn lands, when water meant survival. Imagine living in a time when stepping onto land meant walking into a battlefield. During the Vietnam War, civilians had no choice but to flee the burning villages and war-ravaged fields. Many found salvation on the Tonle Sap Lake in Cambodia, creating entire floating villages to avoid bloodshed. Even today, these floating communities exist, a living testament to a time when the water provided safety while the land burned with chaos. But this isn't just a Southeast Asian story. The same survival instinct led to one of history's most famous waterbound cities, Venice. Built on 118 small islands, Venice was intentionally designed as a fortress against barbarian invasions in the 5th century. Its canals served as moats, protecting its people while the rest of Europe was being ravaged by war. While armies tore through land-based cities, Venice thrived, proving that sometimes water was the ultimate stronghold. When water was the only escape from slavery. For many enslaved people throughout history, water was freedom. From the Caribbean to the Americas, those who could escape by sea had a better chance at survival than those who ran on land. The maroon communities of Jamaica, formed by escaped slaves, often hid in mountainous regions, but others used the coastline and rivers as their means of escape. One of the most daring examples comes from the Igbo landing in 1803, where a group of enslaved Igbo people, kidnapped from West Africa, overpowered their captors and chose to walk into the sea rather than live in bondage. Their story remains one of the most haunting and powerful testaments to the idea that sometimes water was a better fate than land itself. Natural disasters that force people to water. It's not just war and disease that have made the land uninhabitable. Sometimes the earth itself turns against its inhabitants. Take the Great Flood of China in 1931, which killed an estimated 4 million people, one of the deadliest natural disasters in history. Entire cities were submerged, and those who survived adapted quickly, building floating rafts and water villages to escape the rising tides. A more modern example, Hurricane Katrina in 2005. With land-based evacuation plans failing, those who turned to the water, whether by boats or makeshift rafts, had a better chance of survival than those trapped in flooded homes and streets. 4 shocking facts that will change how you see water and safety. 1. The world's first floating city is already in the making. Governments are now developing floating cities as a response to rising sea levels. The United Nations is backing a project called Oceanic City, which could become a model for climate-proof urban living. 2. There are more than 10 million people living on water today. From the stilt villages of Nigeria's Makoko to the houseboats of Kashmir, millions still rely on water as their primary place of residence. Some out of tradition, others out of necessity. 3. Waterborne diseases have killed more people historically than shipwrecks ever did. While many fear drowning, the biggest killer in history wasn't the ocean itself. It was contaminated water on land. Cholera, dysentery, and typhoid outbreaks claimed more lives than maritime disasters ever could. 4. The idea of living on water is making a comeback. With climate change threatening coastlines, some architects predict that floating homes will become a necessity in major cities within the next 50 years. What does this mean for us today? We often think of land as the foundation of safety and security, but history tells us otherwise. Whether it was war, disease, or environmental disasters, there were times when stepping onto dry land meant certain death. The people who adapted, those who built floating homes, lived on boats, or turned the ocean into their refuge, were the ones who survived. And perhaps, as rising sea levels and climate crises reshape our world, history might repeat itself. Could it be that, in the future, we will once again see water as the safest place to be? What do you think? Would you ever live on water if it meant staying safe? Let us know in the comments below. And if you found this deep dive into history fascinating, hit that subscribe button, like this video, and share it with someone who would love this topic. Because the past isn't just history, it's a warning and perhaps a glimpse into our future.